All right, we're on the air. This is episode 2 for me of the day. Got off with Henry a few hours ago. We did fitness over 40. Actually, kind of similar topic. We were talking about resistance training, its importance. Obviously, it's fitness over 40, but we were really getting into depth of just for anyone. Obviously, it's good. The principle is there, but we talked about it, how much it could be helping somebody over the age of 30 and on.
Nice.
And going over some reasons why people might not want to do it or think they don't want to do it. Henry was really blunt in telling how he disagreed with the myths, and he was on it. He was fired up. It was a good episode.
The Puerto Rican heat was coming out.
Yeah, he was great. He did a really good job, and I think he talks. He's really relatable. I had a few clients that watched the episodes, and a friend of mine who watched his episode, and they were like, they really liked it. It was a good little break from. It was just so different in the the breadth of what we're talking about with all of our episodes versus that.
Yeah. Good.
And and he's he does a good job of I would say posing it for another person to understand, like someone who's 55 and maybe doesn't do any strength training. He simplifies it really well. So it's a great episode. So if anyone's out there looking for another cool little show to watch, Fitness Over 40 with Henry, it's a great place to start. We got another episode coming out soon. But today we're talking about somewhat of resistance training. It's a different version, different blend. The flavor of odd object strength training. You might know it as strongman training if you were, I don't know, in 2012, if you were at home and just flipping through on like a Tuesday at noon and you just saw these 400-pound men like pulling cars and stuff. That was strongman early days, and it was cool. And I would always try and get to watch it. But super beneficial for CrossFit. We tested a lot in CrossFit, and it could just be a fun way, even if you're not competitive and you just love training functional fitness and CrossFit, it could be a great way for you to start training as well. So today we're talking about odd object strength training, going over from a lot of stuff that Sam has put together for us. So yeah, what do you think about the Strongman? Did you ever watch it growing up?
Oh yeah, all the time. My brother and I'd watch it. It was the best. It was always like the Swedish or Norwegian, Icelandic guys, like Paul Danielson or something. Actually, I think that was the famous economist. But there was some guy named like Paul, Strongman's son or something. Somebody that was a savage.
There was one guy that had a similar first and last name, and he was world champ multiple years in a row, and he was from I don't know, Czech or something. And he was
maybe the Polish guy. Yeah.
It maybe started with a U, like EU or Ulick or Uric.
Yeah, something. I know what you're talking about.
He was a champ for a long time.
Multi-time champ. Stravicus, Bodavicus or something.
Yeah. You're right there.
The wildest names, but they were great. It was fun to watch. They do the stones. They flip things. They pulled the car. They were super strong. It was big probably 10 years ago. I think it's actually gotten bigger. It's just people don't really watch, or at least ESPN really where they don't see it. And I think more Americans have come into the scene because we would watch it, my brother and I. We'd watch the American, but he was always, at that time at least, he was always a few steps behind the European guys. I think when CrossFit was starting to blossom and they were, trying to combine all these different facets of fitness, strongman was a facet. And so they started playing with that. Some of the people high up in CrossFit were interested in it. Rob Orlando would be a great example. Somebody who was a multi-games athlete. I think he worked for CrossFit. He kind of helped bring in, his gym or something might have been called hybrid or something, which was
he had the strongman cast, like you could buy the stone casts and buy some
exactly. Yeah, that was the original hybrid, which was strongman and CrossFit. Now it's running and lifting weights, but so that started getting incorporated, and then you looked at the games and you started seeing a lot of sleds. yoke, sandbags, heavy carries. Trying to think of other like odd object type events that they would have. It became a staple, especially at the games level, and so that's
Yeah,
a good thing to
rope pool on the sled.
Yep, exactly. So there, I think that'd be a good thing to preface this with is that you'll see in competition a lot of odd object strength training or events at the games level where they have a lot more wiggle room with how they're going to test people. You're not going to see it at the open or quarterfinal or even semifinal level. You might get some things at the semifinal, like heavy farmer carry or a sandbag, but or sled pull, actually, sled pull. But a lot of things like the yoke and whatnot, you're going to see at the games level. That doesn't mean, though, that for those of us who aren't at the games level, can't leverage this as a tool, because it is a great tool. It's a great way for getting outside of the very traditional passive movement that a lot of people in CrossFit, bilateral sagittal plane, and creating variability in the way in which you put stress on the body or external load on the body. So that's one of the big, I would say, upsides of odd object strength training is the variability it gives you in how you train the body from a strength perspective. One note I wanted to make up front was the application of it, in my mind, is really potent for those that have higher training ages, where you have to be very strategic with how you're going to stress the system and ensuring that you're not overloading them with too much intensive lifting. So this acts as a great way to put load on the system, challenge the system, but not, overload the back squat so much to where their system gets really burnt out. With those that have a younger training age, they're going to need specificity. Like they need to back squat once or twice a week, every week for, the next 3 years. So you can use this as a supplementary tool, but it won't be a huge focal point as it might be for a more advanced athlete where you're trying to be smart with how much you're trying to load their system. So that's a general overview of actually one other thing I'd say is in CrossFit, in comparison to like weightlifting, where everything is very fixed and known and very specific, which CrossFit being the opposite of that, which is it's very unknown, it's varied, it's not specific, it's all inclusive. One of your aims with your training is to create as wide of a repertoire of contractions and movement exposure such that your adaptability becomes great when you have new things that you have to do, whether it's with an external load, whether it's with your body weight, whether it's with a machine. So the inclusion of something like this away from a barbell is a practice in developing that wider array of movement exposure that you need for overall development from a performance perspective and also from an adaptability perspective, because your ability to adapt to new challenges or new environments is really, really important, especially as you get higher up in this sport. So odd object training is allowing the athlete to learn to develop the ability to adapt more quickly than if they just back squatted or did clean and jerks all the time. Because then they're going to get something weird, like, okay, now you're going to do some stones, or you're going to have to throw this med ball over an object. Like, in my opinion, they won't be as adaptable as somebody who's tried some of those things in their training. So,
yeah, like the weightlifter. There's plenty of weightlifters that could benefit from it, but their sport is so specific. The benefit of doing it's like it's not necessarily helping them become a better weightlifter. It could just be a tool that could help them, in a specific scenario.
with
Whereas
rehab,
like
or
burnout,
deloading.
rehab, or resiliency, or maybe there is something super specific, some sandbag carries or something trying to make a stronger back or whatever it is. But in CrossFit, it's more twofold because of the skill aspect of it, because we have to, there are plenty of times where you'll have to do these movements. And then, like you said, we're trying to train to become more adaptable and widen the exposure, widen the your skill set to being able to do these tough contractions. So
Yeah.
it definitely, there's like a lot of ways it weaves into helping you as an athlete
Mhm.
in this sport.
One thing I'd add on to piggyback on that is athleticism as a concept, I think, can be connected to adaptability. Like people who are
Mhm.
athletic can move and manipulate their body more quickly than other people in novel environments. That might be one way you could classify it as athleticism. And so one of the ways you do that is you need to continually put yourself in these novel changing environments, so you're getting exposure, so your brain and body is upgrading its ability to figure that out and come up with a strategy to perform or accomplish whatever it might be. So the variability of training, i.e. odd object training for strength, is very helpful in the practice of that, because you can get very rigid in CrossFit training where it's like, I'm just doing these movements and I'm just going to do them over and over again. And people can become not as adaptable. And so that actually might be the central theme of all this conversation, is the importance of this idea or tool is the adaptability that it gives you. That is very, very helpful, and something that's not as closed. It's not a closed system. CrossFit is very open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was thinking about the games events, like some have had such little, sometimes there's a odd object thrown in there. Like I was thinking alpaca, it's got the sled,
Yeah.
it's got the farmer's carry and the rope climb, but that still seemed more CrossFit-y.
Kettlebells.
The kettlebell clean and jerk, versus like there was the sandbag clean, which is just straight up 100% odd object.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you said the med ball, I was thinking the med ball GHD. They had that one year where they had to throw them off the GHD. Thinking of the athleticism, like it's highly doubtful anyone did that other than maybe in like a prep or something.
Yeah.
But then they had to, then there was like some accuracy involved, and it was just a lot different. So yeah, and it was definitely the more athletic people were, the baseball players or the sport people were shining a little bit more there.
Yeah. And I think one thing we haven't mentioned is it's fun. If you design it well, it's fun to do. It's fun to drag a sled. It's fun to play with sandbags. It's fun to carry things. It's fun to use a yoke. Just gets you out of the very monotonous and repetitive practice that is a lot of the aspects inside of CrossFit. So when designed appropriately and placed appropriately in the training, it acts as a nice way of lifting the enjoyment of the training process, which is really important, because if you're not enjoying it, it'll be harder to be motivated and stay consistent with your training. So you have to, what matters and what's important or what's necessary with, like what's enjoyable and what's fun for this person. There's a balance there that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah. And for me, thinking about it, the psychological aspect of it being, you can do something very hard and very challenging. So like, say you're just doing, a 20 meter yoke carry on your back. And then you're doing, some sandbag over the yoke with 150 pounds, like 4 reps. And then you're resting 2 minutes. There's no like real like attachment to the number, like whether I did 600 pounds on the yoke or 625 or the 150, like if I did it in 3 seconds per rep. I mean, there might be a little bit, I'm trying to, but it's not the same as like I built up to a tough single on the snatch today. I only hit 200 pounds and I really wanted 205, or I hit a double and it wasn't as quick as I wanted. Like it's so much easier to get tied up in that, where this, you feel like you have much more freedom. And to me, for a lot of clients that I'm thinking of, could be way more beneficial for them, and the enjoyment of it, and then they might even be getting a better stimulus. They might be performing better without knowing. So I think that's a huge piece.
Well, I mean, it forces you to connect a little bit more to effort and your breathing, your bracing, how you're moving. You're less attached to the load, which you're right. A lot of people get really attached to the load. So getting yourself in an environment that's not as known, you can't use load necessarily as a guide for how you should be operating or working or performing what you're doing. You have to like, okay, can I lift this up? Okay, I can't. Oh, this is tough. I need to brace a little bit. Okay, I need to, take an extra breath here. So yeah, it gets people thinking in a different way, more in their body, which can be a good thing. So yeah, that was a really good point.
Yeah, you have two categories and classifications, how you kind of described them in back to your course that we've referenced a lot. But you had isometrics and carries were kind of in one, and then the pulls, push, and cleans, which you thought were two good encompassing. I mean, there's probably with strongman, it's probably one of the easiest ones to like find some niche movement that's like not in there or something, but which is kind of the cool part of it. But as a whole, these are the things we're seeing in our sport and things that we're using in our training.
Yeah. And the nice thing about it too is usually there's not a lot of eccentric loading in strongman. So it's not as fatiguing / what would be another word? Burdensome on the system from a recovery standpoint. So there's a lot of concentric loading. There's isometrics, which are much less damaging, which is in this sense a good word, than doing high rep deadlift or something like that, or like high rep chest to bar pull-ups. So yeah, a lot of carries, which you could classify as a pseudo isometric. And then, lots of pulls and pushes with sleds, cleaning, axle bars, sandbags, kettlebells, even like a log or something.
Log,
people are doing, log
worm almost.
Or the worm, the worm too. So so those are two good ways of thinking about, okay, how would I classify or categorize movements that would fit inside of this strongman type training, odd object strength training.
Yeah. Anything that's, other than an axle bar, I would say, like anything that you the dumbbells, like you have one in each hand, or you only have one, or same with the kettlebell. Like you can't use this with a barbell. You're holding onto it, or you have it stationary in one area where both sides of your body can use each other to help balance it out. Where, if you're holding 2 70-pound dumbbells in each hand and doing squats, like one side could hurt way worse or be much weaker than the other, and it's noticeable.
Yeah, there's a lot less bilateral sagittal plane movement. It's pretty much none, unless you did like a sandbag squat, but even that will be a little bit funky. So yeah, that's the big draw of it all is you're getting out of those planes of movement that you're always inside the gym.
And thinking back on the athleticism part, because we're going to get into how do we train it, I don't think people will realize maybe until they've actually done it in an event is like how much just the small touches would help them. Like even just doing, it might not be super common for people to be doing dumbbell front squat at a tough, really heavy load, instead of just front squats, or doing, sandbag cleans into sandbag front squats and into carries for their accessory work, instead of just doing more traditional, bending and squatting, or, dumbbell step up. So just the minor exposure you could have in it week to week could have a huge payoff, because in the sport, people will say like, the best are most adaptable and most quickly, but this isn't something that's just like brand new where no one has tried it. There are some people that have trained with a sandbag once a week for a few years, and if you've only touched it 5 times, like there's a huge difference. So I would definitely nudge people in the direction to finding ways to touch this more often.
Well, a lot of it is, I would say, learning how to brace and hold tension, because it's different than a barbell. Like how do you brace when you're lifting the sandbag, or how do you brace with the yoke, or how do you brace when you push the sled or carry like really heavy dumbbell or kettlebell? So there's a different type of approach with your body and preparing it for the activity than with barbell. And because you work with the barbell in your body weight so much during the week, how to do that really well, all things being equal. Whereas you don't do this as often, usually there's more of a gap for your brain to go, okay, yeah, when I pick up this sandbag, I have to take a breath and brace a little bit, then pop it, then exhale, then finish it, or something like that. Like it's a little clunkier because you don't do it 2 times a week, every week of every year. So yes, you need to be touching it, especially if you're getting closer to competition. You're going to have to do strongman work, but it's great in that sense. Also, as another reason for its value is helping you learn how to brace, breathe, hold tension in different positions, different environments than you otherwise would. Well, a couple other I had written down a couple other benefits specific to odd object strength training is your grip and low back seem to be like two of the biggest regions that get taxed with it in a good way. So if somebody does have low back limitations or grip limitations, you could really lean into leveraging these tools to work on those areas specifically. And those are, of course, they're somewhat linked, those two, but they're also high value regions, because if your back is very enduring and you feel very strong with your back, you're going to feel a lot more confident and resilient when you're training or competing, because the back is an anchoring point for the body. And then the grip is extremely important inside of CrossFit because you do so much gripping. And so feeling, again, confident there, capable with your grip. So that's another huge value add of odd object strength training, is the application on your low back and grip and the adaptations it drives. The other two other things, breathing and bracing. So that's something that you have to be able to do with a lot of odd object strength training. Like you have to know how to breathe through the brace, as they say, which is, to give an example, like if you pick up a yoke, you obviously have to brace because you need tension to support the load. But as you're walking, you have to breathe. Otherwise, you'll pass out or you'll have to stop. So you have to learn how to actually hold a brace and then breathe while you're holding the brace. And that's something that not everybody knows how to do. So when you're picking up a sandbag, same thing. If you're carrying really heavy farmer carries, or if you're pushing a sled, there's an element of breathing and bracing that you want to learn how to do, because by learning that, you'll also now have it available when you do other things. So like if you need to breathe and brace with a heavy front squat, or a heavy like kettlebell front squats or something, you'll understand how to do that more easily than somebody that hasn't really been exposed to that. And then the last one being injury risk. So it can drop using this as opposed to just doing like more squats or more deadlifts. Because if you are really loading the barbell patterns maybe too much, or you're pushing it too much, risk of injury can go up a little bit more. And that can, of course, derail training quite a bit. When you get out of that sagittal plane bilateral movement, you add some variability, you're changing the stress on the system, you're removing some of the eccentric loading, you're most of the time shifting load off the axial spine. So whether it's you're pushing or you're carrying it, but you're not going like up and down like you would in a squat or a deadlift. So your risk for injury can go down while you're still getting the stress and the stimulus you want on your system with the strength training, because the strength training is going to be the culprit for a lot of injuries where you're either pushing it too hard or you're not recovering well enough. So this can give you some buffer to ensure that you keep progressing while also making sure you're not putting yourself in a position to possibly get injured. So.
Okay. Well, you could also just do some construction work once a week too.
Yeah. Or
some wheelbarrows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wheelbarrows.
Carrying some bags, some lumber. Because strongman equipment is not expensive if you look at it through that lens.
Well, unless you want to buy like a Rogue sandbag that costs $100 for just the actual bag, then you got to go buy the sand.
Well, I meant you could just volunteer, just find a construction site.
Yes, you're right. You do. You'd get all the work that you would you'd get otherwise. Yep.
There might not be a lot of rest. The rest will be walking back and forth to the other material.
Yeah.
But the sandbag's probably the the sandbag and the sled are probably the easiest and best like bang for your buck tools to purchase,
100%.
because 150-pound sandbag, even a 200, it's like 90 to $100. And then a sled, you could always find one on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. And if not, there's still like Rogue has like some cheaper sled options that are under $200.
So real quick story on sleds. So so I was 16, so that would have been what, 2007? Yeah, so 2007. I turned 16, and I was just starting to get into lifting weights. And Jim Windler was big then. His 531 had came out. Of course, Elite ETF was big. Westside, all those guys, and they were all doing like sled work. But Jim Windler really pushed it in 531. Like, this is the way you train people for conditioning. You just push a prowler back and forth until you like want to puke, and then you rest. You do it again, then you're done. So
back when it was called the prowler.
The prowler, yeah. So I was like, okay, then I'm buying the prowler for my birthday, and I buy a prowler. It was a red one, and of course
was it like triangular, like it had two poles and then a single pole with like a little push with the neutral grip?
No, so it had it was the Echo prowler, because when I was 16 I didn't have a lot of money, so I bought the cheaper one. So it had two poles, and then it had front two handles. So it wasn't. So it was it made a T, but it didn't have that like triangle beam on each side. But I could load up a bunch and push it. It was great. Anyway, so I get it. Of course, the city had just like repaved our street, so it's like the friction is through the roof. I put on like 25. Oh, no, it wasn't even mine. I went across the street because the guys across the street, they had like full gym in their garage. They were super strong. And I went over and I was like, hey, can I borrow some like 25s or whatever? And they're like, yeah, of course. And so I like took the 25s. I called up my buddy who I'd work out with, and I was like, dude, I got my prowler. Come over, we'll do some pushes. He's like, okay, great. And went like down 50 feet. Maybe more than that, maybe like 100 feet and back. And we did that maybe 3 times, and I thought I was going to puke. It was so bad. Like the second, so you go down, and it's like you're still moving pretty good. Then all of a sudden it kicks in, and then I'm coming back, and it's like my cadence is just slowing every single stride, and then I'd like barely push it off to him, and I'd like fall. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. And it was great. I used that all the way. I started in 2007, so I moved to Arizona in 2017. So I had that for 10 years. And I used that a ton with training. It was just, it's so simple, great for the legs. Again, there's not any eccentric loading, so the fatigue isn't that burdensome. You can use it. It's just, sleds are great. And then, sandbags. I love sandbags just because especially if you've had a history of, I'm going off script here, but that's okay. If you've had a history of back issues, or you're not as confident with your back, getting to the point where you feel like you feel really confident with a sandbag can create a lot of confidence in your back, because it's almost impossible to pick up a heavy sandbag with a perfectly neutral spine. Like you have to get into some sort of a flex spine position. Doesn't mean you're moving through flexion in your spine. It's like you're locking in the flexion and then you're moving at your hip, but you have to be capable of getting a little bit more flexed, bracing, and then really using your hips really well to lift it. So the sandbag is great for just building a lot of confidence and resilience in the back. And that's more indicative of how you actually will pick things up in life. Like the way you set up for a deadlift is not really like when I get my son out of his crib and I got to bend way over. I'm not like, okay, I'm going to set my spine, take my breath, hinge. Like, no, I got to bend over. I got to flex my back a little bit. And, even though he only weighs 16 pounds right now, like it's still tough. Like you have to have some strength. Otherwise you will hurt yourself. So those two tools, which you mentioned, which are great, very simple, cost effective, can go a long ways for your training in many different facets.
It's so funny, the evolution of being in strength training or CrossFit or functional fitness. Like you're starting off and everything has to be perfect, and you make fun of people that like make fun of. You're not making fun of, but you see the rounded back and you're like, oh, dude, are you kidding me? Like you got to do this. You can't have that. Like you you have to do it perfectly, and it's like cringe and you hate it. And then you start getting good and you've been experienced, you've been doing it for a long time. And then someone like won't round their back, or they like refuse to. And then now they're the soft, it's just changed. Like, you're like, oh, you can't round your back. Like, you can't pick something up with a little round. So it goes full circle. But yeah, you got to be able to do it. You got to be able to be a little round and make it work.
And that comes back to an initial point we mentioned, which was adaptability, because if you're going to put yourself in a more novel environment, you need good adaptability with your strength, your joint integrity, your tendon integrity. Like, your body needs to be strong in these odd positions, because if you're that fragile, where if you're not in a nice locked spine position, pick up something, and if there's any amount of flexion, your back's going to snap, then I'm sorry, but you're gonna get squashed at any major CrossFit competition, because there's so many moments where you have to be able to just pick it up and move with somewhat compromised positions. So you need to build that bandwidth. Like, I need bandwidth for the body. So that's why this is also just such a great tool, is it helps build that, because you're not going to necessarily build that with like heavy squat cleans. Like, I want you to catch this squat clean rounded and come out of the hole really round. It's like, you don't train the lift that way. Like, you could do sandbag front squats or bear hug sandbag squats, and then you can practice like, okay, now I have to be somewhat rounded, so I need to practice that now. So yeah. Definitely a good point.
Okay. Yeah. I just had to write this down. You were reminding me with your sled story. There was a guy at our gym when I was growing up in high school at a CrossFit gym, and he would, every time we did sleds, he threw up. Like, no kidding. He probably threw up 5 times each time in the gym. It was a sled. He would just be pushing the sled and just stop and throw up and then go right back up, right back and keep going. And I was better than him at the time. And I was so confused. I was like, man, can I really just not push myself to that? Like, how can he do this? Like, how, because I would be like, I'll push the sled as hard as I can. And I would just quit. Like, my legs would just stop moving, and I'd be like, man, like, I cannot throw up.
I'm so weak because I can't throw up.
I thought something was wrong with me because I couldn't push to that. And then I quickly found, I guess, another workout. So I was like, actually, I think I could throw up right now.
And you're like, oh, wait, actually, it's not a good thing to throw up.
It's not cool at all.
I guess I am doing better.
All right. So we got two kind of ways to train it that we've broken down. There's more, but overall two
ideas for how to train it.
Okay. 2 ideas, and 2 ideas that are really applicable to CrossFit. One, kind of a big piece of it would just be thinking of it like strength training. Like, you could do 5x5 sandbag deadlifts, you rest 2 minutes. You could do, axle bar cleans, or you could do sandbag cleans. You could do a 100-foot sled push, rest 2 minutes, rest 3 minutes. You could do all that. You have it written out a little more differently. For this example. So for this example, you had 5 sets at strength effort, 3 sandbags.
Just to give context, if I wrote that for someone, it just means that I don't want them to rush through it. I want them to move with quality. There's going to probably be a lot more tension, so you're not going to. The intention of the piece is a lot different than if I asked you to row burpees and thrusters for 4 minutes. Like, it's very different. So I'll use that language for people to give them context on, like, what are we going after with this piece?
Yeah. Same. When I say strength effort, I'll tell people, like, you're there's no set rest. You're basically resting as little as possible with keeping everything high quality and feeling like you're performing at a strength level. So like, again, 5 sets at strength effort. So like you said, you're doing 3 sandbag to shoulder at 100 or 150 pounds. It could be 200 pounds, a 30-foot sled drag, 30 weighted double unders, 30-foot sled drag, and then 3 sandbag to shoulder again. So like he said, like, you're not doing it for time. You do the 3 maybe on the right shoulder. Then you would head into the sled drag, push it, tough load, no breaks, but it's challenging. The weighted double unders, and then you're kind of going back down that, and then finishing on the left shoulder. And then you're resting 2 minutes, so that you need the break, and then you can repeat it. And you could fit this in It could be the main strength portion for somebody on a day, depending on who it is. It could be the last thing they do in a day, because you're going to get the strength effect from it, but also like this, you're going to be breathing heavy. This could be used for someone who, maybe they're short on time and they need a little bit of the mix of the strength work with, something a little more cardiovascularly straining on them. But yeah, I think like you said, telling them like the intention is going to be big, because they can easily do this really fast or out of control, or go a little lighter and be more on the speed side of it, and not really get out as much as they could.
Yep. Yeah. And kind of going back to one of the things I mentioned earlier, most of the application of this is really useful for people who are more trained, because they're gonna better understand the level of toughness and challenge we're going to want on the sled drag. They're obviously going to need to be strong enough to lift the sandbag 30 times. So like that's a barrier to entry right away. Like if you can't, I would say easily, but if you can't move that bag fairly well 30 times, then you wouldn't do something like this, because you're just gonna get hurt. So see that as an example of, okay, how do we blend elements of lifting and dragging and maybe some other pieces to give them about a minute and a half, 2 minutes worth of work, let them rest a little bit, repeat that. So yes, this could be a great accessory strength piece for somebody. That could be at the end of a session. It could be on its own day. So maybe the third, maybe you have 2 days that are more gymnastic body weight heavy, and then you have 3 days that involve lower body strength work. So maybe 2 of those are more Olympic lifting, squatting based. And then that third day, you have some work capacity pieces, and then you have odd object strength work. So instead of them just squatting or deadlifting more, you have them doing something like this to just create some variability in that training. So this would be just an example of work rest scenarios. So that would be one way you could design pieces for odd object is work rest. And you maybe want to err on the side of more rest, making sure they feel well recovered for the next set, because again, it's more of a strength endurance environment. So we don't need to necessarily push the rest day. The next piece we'll talk about, you could then that's where you would stress it a little bit more. But usually I want quality high with things like this.
Yeah. So leading into the next part, which that part was, again, think just more traditional strength, as in work to rest, 5 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets of X work, rest, and then repeat. The next portion is grinders, which I think, I don't know how many people would be like know this or have experience with this. Like I did this a lot, like starting in like 2014, like 12 to 15 minute grinders. It was like 10 cal row at tamper 10, 5 box jumps at 30 inches, and then like 100-foot farmer's carry at like 100 pounds per hand. They were a little different then, but it was still similar. And I love doing them, and I still like them now. But in your case, you have a little different example. But we took this from your course again. The grinders are a method of training that falls inside of the odd object strength training category, which combines cyclical aerobic work with tough strength contractions. So you I'm sure that's like the principle of it, and you may, maybe you do it a little different sometimes, but overall it's a conditioning piece that is involving the odd object at a slow, maybe not slow, but like at a steady, tough pace. For a set period of time with no rest.
Yeah, you're controlling the intensity by making the tension really high. So which kind of facilitates this grinding like nature, where you can't move through it fast like you could rowing and burpees. You can't move through it fast like you would with moderate power clean and jerk and toes to bar and running. So in the example, 30 minutes, 30-meter farmer carry heavy, 6 box jumps at a high box, 30-meter sled drag heavy, 6 single arm hang kettlebell snatch heavy, 30 cal C2 bike. Usually if I write something like this, I make if I am using a cyclical element, which is it's good to use that, especially if people are not as trained, because it helps them regulate pace and effort a little bit more. I'll
Mhm.
usually label it, either I'll give them a pace or I'll write, nice and easy recovery based, because it's almost like it's an active recovery within the piece that they're doing. So the main work is the carries, the jumping, and the kettlebell work. So the bike's just kind of there to keep them on track and ensure they're not going too hard to where they start needing really, really big breaks.
Yeah.
So that's the nature of it. It's a great tool for people who are not in shape. It's a great concept that you could use. So you can make it a lot smooth, or a lot more, the barrier to entry a lot lower. It could be 30 cal C2 bike, 20-meter sled push tough, and then like 10 Russian kettlebell swings tough. And then maybe you give them on the bike a prescribed pace that's really easy. That's just a great way to build fitness and also give their system some stress with external load. So it does act as a nice tool for getting people, more in shape, because you have so much tension, you're going to drive blood pressure up really high. You're going to drive cardiac output up quite a bit. So there's this like really high effort breathing level associated with it because of just the tension. So it's a really good tool when needed.
Yeah. I get excited when I see that in my design, and because it's usually something that's very challenging, but for how challenging it is, it's very fun.
Yeah.
Versus like when you see something as challenging as like burpees and thrusters, you're rarely like,
Mhm.
I'm so excited to do this. But
Yeah.
now I know it's just because you think I'm out of shape at the time. So now I won't be as
Yeah.
excited when I'm doing it. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna be like, "What?
Well,
I
hey,
get
you,
it."
you haven't done them in a while, so that must be a good
I
thing.
know.
You must be in good shape. Yeah.
It was about this time last year. I remember because I had like a memory pop up. I was
Oh,
doing
nice.
I was doing them weekly. It was 30
Yeah.
minutes. It was bike erg, 36-inch box jumps, and I remember there was like 100-pound front squat, 100-pound
Oh,
dumbbell front
nice.
squats.
Oof.
Um, they
Yeah.
were
Well,
heavy.
and I mean, two things. One, on the note for you, like this odd object strength training is not or at least in my head and how I think of things, it's not a primary tool. Like
Hmm.
primary tools would be weightlifting, absolute strength training, gymnastics, cyclical capacity, sport specific capacity. Like those would be like primary things that you need to be working on in the context of the sport. Because again, training needs to move us closer to getting better at the sport. So this is a supplementary type idea. So if it's included, then it made sense at the time, given where the main priorities were kind of laid out. And so
Yeah.
now for you, because you're getting stronger, you're more trained, do you need something like this? Like, not necessarily. Like, I'd rather you spend that time working on, specific things that are going to make you better. Because if you had to do something like this, you would do fine. Like you wouldn't have any problems. So whereas somebody that maybe they are lacking a little bit, or they need some exposure to this type of work, that's like, okay, let's use that. So I think that's important for coaches listening, that you want to think of these as like a supportive tool in your toolbox, not necessarily a primary one,
Hmm.
um, unless your client just wanted varied strength training and didn't care about competing. But considering our
Yeah.
competitive conversations title, if you are going after CrossFit, then yeah, it's more supportive.
Yeah. Yeah. Back to the construction analogy. Sam just knows I have so much time spent just
Yeah,
carrying stuff for my
yeah.
family and
You got big
for my father.
hands, strong forearms. Like you don't need stuff like this.
Yeah. Good
Austin Cap, though, if
resiliency
he's
to
listening,
splinters.
he needs stuff like this. Got to turn him into a
Okay.
man. So that's why he's doing stuff like that with the yoke and
Yeah.
sandbag, which he loves. He's doing great. So
Yeah. I've seen some of the yoke stuff you've been posting. I
yeah,
saw you posted a press to handstand, and
yeah.
they bet. I mean, I feel like they're just teasing me, trying to get me out of retirement here. But like, guys, the race was settled years ago. Come on. You got to be over 200 pounds in order to make the press handstand to be cool.
Yeah.
I'm just joking. It was actually a solid one. It was a good rep. Coming down, if he accomplishes that soon, that'll be way more impressive.
That's impressive.
Coming down is really good.
It's hard.
All right, so we went over what is it, how do I train it, and we've talked about it a lot, but how will it get me better at CrossFit?
Yeah, I guess just circling back.
Yeah, we talked about it. It improves overall strength and resiliency, which we touched on a lot.
Yep.
The spine, the odd positions, and then
the broadening of. Oh, that's never mind. It's number 3. I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, we got that too. Yeah, the improving athleticism, which is kind of tied into almost everything we've talked about, and then like you just said, the broadening of the contractions and just the different things you're experiencing. To maybe allow you to get a different stimulus, almost like training variation. Almost like the West Side approach. They use different variation because it allows them to, they think break through plateaus. But also just the, accumulating different reps of different things because you may be exposed to it later. And then the direct skill work, like you will likely, if you're going to be competing for years or competing in throwdowns and local comps and whatever it is, you're going to run into sandbag cleans or an axle bar deadlift or tough carries. So, or maybe even some single arm overhead mixed grip carry, different hands, different items. So you're going to be exposed to it. So I feel like with everything we've just said, you by now you have to know you're going to get better at CrossFit from doing it.
Yeah.
And then I also noted kind of to end on were some considerations for the training, which you talked about a lot too, where you have to be, one of them was you have to be strong enough to do it. Because I was thinking, I was just thinking my wife alone, she's pretty strong. She's got like a 300-pound deadlift. She weighs about 138, 140 pounds. She, has a good squat, very good upper body puller and presser. But that sandbag, she tried it. She didn't want to do it until I made her try it and she couldn't do it. And then it became like some obsession. Like she had to be able to stand up with that sandbag and get it to her shoulder. And it really just took a lot of practice and time, even though she was strong. Like she's strong. She still wasn't yet strong enough and probably just didn't have a wide enough exposure to different strength training. Cause really she's only done barbell strength training for a few years. So yeah, there's a lot of considerations with it. What were you going to say?
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, back to getting better at CrossFit. If another thing to keep in mind is if somebody has a back injury or some sort of injury that limits them from traditional strength protocols, odd object training can be a great way to work around that, where you're still able to put stress on the system. So I actually have a client who recently, he hurt his back. He did a competition over a weekend, and it was a lot for a 2-day team competition. And then a few days later, he went back to training. He was doing some snatching, and his back just got really tight. Didn't like it. So the rest of that week, I pivoted what he was doing, and we used a lot of sled work. We used some carries. We used the ergs quite a bit. So it can be a really great tool in times when maybe you're limited on what people can do, but you still want to load their system and challenge them. Like sled's great. Almost, unless, like any type of back pain or like shoulder pain, you can pretty much use the sled. Like the sled is so versatile and non-invasive. So there's a lot of, this is just a great tool to have in your toolkit as a coach, because you can use it in situations where you can't use the typical tools that you otherwise would. And then on the considerations piece, yes, it's super important to acknowledge that you need a minimum level of strength. Like putting your body, when people get into training, the first step is you're learning how to move your body in space, and you're learning how to control your movement. You're learning how to coordinate movement. You're learning how to coordinate the firing and the usage of certain muscles in a certain movement and relaxing other ones, motor coordination, let's call it. Then you're starting to load it. You're learning how to load. You're learning how to express force. You're learning how to push against force in good positions with good motor control. So you need You need a lot of that so that then you can get out of that and be a little bit more compromised, like picking up a sandbag or picking up a really heavy yoke or picking up heavy dumbbells or kettlebells. Like you're not going to necessarily be in perfect positions when you do those things. So you got to have a really great base of strength. So your bandwidth for what you can handle is really big. So again, if you are more of a novice or your clients are novice, you're probably going to limit it to maybe sled variations and maybe some carries, but the carries are more moderate. But you might not be dipping in sandbag stuff yet or heavy yoke stuff. Like they need more time under the bar. So yeah, definitely need to be. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, like what is the minimum strength. Like I don't have one in mind. It's more like you see it. Like when you see it, you go, yeah, okay, they're probably strong enough now. They're ready for something like this.
And the athleticism piece a little bit too, because I know people that were as strong as my wife, but they handled the sandbag way better. And they could just, they just had more time spent, or maybe they did lighter loads a lot more. And maybe, did the 100 pounds 100 times. And, the 150 was just a little more easy. Okay. Another consideration I had was it might not be the best use of time for everyone, which you alluded to, because they might not be strong enough time of year, like if it's right before quarterfinals and, muscle ups and handstand push-ups and handstand walks are their biggest weaknesses, then it might not be the best use of time. And also if you're, 18 years old and you've only been doing this for 2 years, and you need to snatch more, like the make or break on your ability to lift a sandbag is probably not going to it's not going to make or break you. You need so much time spent doing the absolute basics, because you are, even if you're really good, you are still a novice, like you said, in the sport. So you have to just be putting in the reps and the time, similar to why, in a sport like football, you're running routes and practicing the most basic footwork and the most basic drills. You're not practicing one-handed catches. You might be trying to do that, but that's not what you should be working on. And then the last note, which we've already touched on too, was it could be a great tool for those experiencing burnout, and that could be kind of synonymous with injury or maybe just some chronic pain, because like you said, it's so easily adaptable. You can get such a good, quality, hard, challenging contraction without having to have as much stress maybe on a joint or on a specific area. You can always change an angle. You can walk with the sled backwards instead of forwards. You can do a heavy front squat.
And what you said, which was you're not attached to these things like you are a barbell. So if you are burning out or you're a little in pain or you're injured, when if you go to do a deadlift or a squat, you're attaching what you've done to what you're doing now, and then you make a judgment on whether or not you're doing well. But if you don't have a lot of experience or exposure to a sled or a carry or a yoke, you don't know. You're just like, I'm just put some weight on it. Like, oh, that feels tough. And so that removes that, that judgment, which is huge. And so that can make it enjoyable, fun, and you feel like you're working hard and you're getting a good stimulus. So that's why it's a great tool to use when the time calls for it.
Yeah. The only attachment I have to the sled is that I know how much one of my female on-site clients has put on the sled before. And I remember I was doing it recently. I was like, dang, I feel like that one time she had like 445s on it. So I was like, got to put a 45 minimum.
Wow. That's a lot.
So yeah, we got turf though. So, it might be a little different.
So the friction's really low.
Yeah. Now we don't actually. So now it's rubber or dirt. Which rubber is like, you don't need any, we don't need any sled on or any weight on our rubber. If anything, we need assistance, but all right. I think that was a good little wrap up. Odd object strength training. This super good for a lot of reasons. It can get you really strong and help you kind of probably push through some areas you might be lacking in. But similar to why I think, a lot of places like Westside do use it. It's like their shotgun effect. Like we don't know why his back is weak or what part of his back is weak, but we're going to just absolutely hammer the back with reverse sled drags and sandbag carries. There is some validity to it. But for us, it has a lot of applicability. So I hope everyone learned something. Any closing thoughts about some odd objects?
No, I mean, start simple, get a sandbag, get a sled, push the sled 100 feet, carry the sandbag 100 feet, Do that 10 times. There you go. That's like a good entry point. Just feel it, see what it's like, experience it. Especially if you're a coach, as it is with anything we talk about. If you're not familiar with what we're doing or what we're talking about, the best place to start is do it yourself. Come up with something simple, try it, see what it feels like. That will give you a good sense of what your client can then expect when you design it for them. So if you want to better understand something, you need to experience it yourself, because that's just going to give you a perspective that you otherwise won't be able to get. So that would be my recommendation.
All right. You heard it here first, probably. Start simple, get that sandbag, use a kettlebell, whatever you got to do. But we hope you learned something. If you have any questions, let us know. And yeah, this is probably one of the secrets of being super strong and the strongest in your gym and the coolest in your gym, because that day that sandbag comes out in the workout or at a competition and you're ready and other people aren't, you will look like a star.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, remember it. And then you can, if that ever happens, you can let us know. You can thank us later.
Tag us.
Tag us. Tag us, #proof3 odd object strength training. Thanks for listening, everybody. We're looking forward to seeing you next week, and thank you for all the support on the views, the likes, the subscribes, all of it. We appreciate it, and until next time.